What million to one odds have you witnessed? Was having a slingshot war with rocks in the woods because that's what 13-year kids do. Steve and I see each other on parallel trails and we both let one fly. The rocks hit midair and ricocheted at perfectly at 90-degree angles. Was at a company picnic when Eli comes to say hi and we give a quick handshake. But we could tell something was weird. We released the handshake, a bee flew out. I like how you drop their names like we know them. Feels very personable. My dad accidentally popped the lens of his glasses out when we were riding up a chairlift on a massive mountain. The snow below was groomed so a lens would not have stuck out like it would have if it fell in fresh powder. Just as we stopped to listen to him complain again, the tip of my ski hit it. I had found the lens down the mountain, nowhere near the lift. To this day no one knows how it got so far from under the chairlift, but I was like finding a transparent needle in a haystack. The lens lodged somewhere in his clothing. He thought it fell to the ground. Later, as he was complaining, it dislodged and your ski struck it. My mother had a large section of her uterus removed after giving birth to my older sister, and her water broke 9 days before I was actually born. I was born with minimal complications and no birth defects. When she first told the doctor she was pregnant for the second time, apparently he just looked up at her and said, "No, you're not." Then after doing a pregnancy test, he told her, "Your husband is a heck of a shot." Apparently the pregnancy alone was 1,000,000 to 1. When her water broke, the nurses told her it hadn't and that she must have just peed herself and sent her home. It wasn't until 9 days later when the contractions ramped up that they went back and the doctor that prepped her was furious she was sent home in the first place. Apparently when I was born I looked like a shriveled up prune but had no major medical complications. This always amazes a friend of mine since her niece was born about a day after her mother's water broke under similar circumstances and has required intense therapy since birth for cerebral palsy. Was on a commercial flight that flew right past the space shuttle when it was taking off. Had a perfect view out the window. Oh wow, I've seen photos of this but couldn't really understand how it felt that it was real. I saw a gargoyle fall from the perimeter of a lofty steeple. Instead of smashing on the sidewalk or hurting someone walking below, it miraculously landed in dense shrubbery in the churchyard, completely unscathed. Because it's a live dude. I went to South Africa in 1988 with my father, who was a research cardiologist at the time. The trip was for a symposium on the side effects of a blood-thinning drug on which he had just completed a large study. During one of the breaks, we drove about 2-3 hours out of Johannesburg to a wine region to tour a winery. Joining our party were the 2 other cardiologists currently conducting research on the drug. One of the doctors was from Italy, and one was from Venezuela. At lunch, an older woman at the table next to ours passed out and fell on the floor, hitting her head fairly soundly. It was lucky that she happened to be sitting next to 3 doctors who could attend her while we waited for the ambulance. What was crazy was that when they were talking to her about her medical history, she was taking the medicine they were studying. It turns out the dosage she had been prescribed was dangerously high, which could cause blackouts and unconsciousness. I'm not sure what the odds are of passing out in rural Africa while sitting next to the 3 foremost medical experts in the world, and those experts having come from 3 other continents, on your blood thinners side effects, but I'd imagine the odds are pretty low. This happened last night, at a dive bar in Brooklyn. The bartender and I were bored, so we invented a game that involved throwing a Nerf football from one end of the bar in an attempt to hit the back wall. It was dead, so nobody was in harm's way. After an awful throw, the bartender runs to retrieve the football, and out of the blue yells, "Go deep," then proceeds to fire a 100-mile-per-hour spiral directly at me. I dodge out of pure fear and the football crashes into my pint of beer and shot glass. Both items go flying at full speed off the bar into the ground, making a very loud shattering sound. We both go OMG, and he walks up to clean the mess when he holds his hands over his mouth in pure terror, looks me in the eyes and says, "I killed a mouse." Sure as crap, under the broken pint glass, dead middle of the floor, laid the fresh corpse of a mouse who just so happened to be running from one side of the bar to another, and the pint glass landed exactly, directly on him when it flew off the bar. We are convinced this was a mouse Final Destination moment. We're still in disbelief. R.I.P. Cheese Boy. In 2006, when I was 19, I lived in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I went to Connecticut with a buddy to meet a girl he had been dating online. I stopped in a game stop for a game to play on the drive back and had just gotten a job at one back home a few months prior and was really into helping people find new games to play. I saw this cute little old lady browsing games and I randomly asked her if she needed help, thinking it was for a relative, and she divulged to me how she loved turn-based RPGs, which I also loved, and I recommended Disgaea to her for the PS2. We left and life went on. A couple years later I was still working at GameStop in Virginia and a little old lady came in and was expressing her excitement for Disgaea 3 for the PS3 and I mentioned that I had met a lady just like her in Connecticut a few years prior. What are the odds? She says that she used to live in Connecticut and that a young man in a game store turned her onto the Disgaea series a few years prior. She moved to Virginia to be closer to her daughter who lived in my hometown. I suppose I can't say 100% that this is a woman I met previously, but I'll be damned if it didn't seem like it. Hey, I'm from Lynchburg. I just moved out last year. Never met someone on Reddit casually that has lived there before. Me. Falling nearly 70 feet out of a tree to land at the feet of a retired cardiologist that was out for a jog. He was doing CPR within seconds of me hitting the ground. Of all the doctors in the world that could have been out for a jog, I fell in front of the one that worked on hearts and retired just a few short weeks prior to my wreck. I'm sorry but this made me chuckle. The poor man wants to retire, goes out for a nice jog and flying body comes out to put him back to work. I have dwarfism and a third nipple. I like to think I'm the only 3-nipple dwarf in the world. My dad took me to a baseball game when I was about 13. Several seats down was a guy who had just bought a hot dog. Right as he was getting ready to take a bite, a bird pooped on it. He didn't take a bite of the hot dog, but his mouth had been open and, judging by his yelling, spitting and cursing shortly after, he must have gotten some splash contact in his mouth from the impact of the poop hitting the hot dog and some bouncing off. This reminds me of the time in high school I had a bag of jelly beans and a bird crap right into the bag as I was walking to meet friends. I was in downtown San Francisco once when I saw a guy across the street that looked very much like a guy named Bennett that lived in my dorm, Yosemite Hall, back in college, 10 years before and 100s of miles away, but I couldn't quite be sure if it was him. Then, out of nowhere, a girl came running across the street and straight up to the guy and said, "Hey Bennett, remember me? I used to live upstairs from you in Yosemite Hall. So all 3 of you lived in Yosemite Hall at the same time. I need to see the end of this 2000s romantic film." I once texted my workout buddy shoulders today and right when I sent it my phone spontaneously spat out the text right back to me as if he had sent it. Thought that was weird but then my buddy told me it was him. Like we legit texted the same exact text to each other letter for letter at the exact same time. And yes we did do shoulders that day. I'm surprised. I would have guessed you guys did legs. Went to a humongous metal festival this summer in Sacramento. Something like 60k people. They were raffling off a guitar that all of the bands there had signed. Dozens of big acts. Sode, Gua, Alice in Chains to name a few. At the end of the last day as we were leaving, a guy from our group said he wanted to buy a last minute ticket before they did the drawing and that he'd meet us back at the cars. About 45 minutes later he calls us and says to come back. He needs an escort. Walk up and this mother is holding the dang guitar. Not exactly 1 in a million, but it sure felt like watching somebody hit the jackpot on a lottery ticket. My daughter, looking at her, you wouldn't really know anything was wrong. We didn't know anything was wrong until she had a seizure. That we saw. Just to rule out anything, they did an MRI totally thinking she just had benign epilepsy. Nope. She's missing about 30% of her brain. She had a stroke a couple weeks before she was born. We have to deal with seizures and some other cerebral palsy related physical issues, but the doctors say 1 more millisecond of stroke and she would have been a 40-week stillbirth. We've had doctors see the MRI and not her and think they walked into the wrong room. They expected to see a non-functional child in a wheelchair. Till strokes can happen in utero. Went to meet my brother and his wife at a casino. As soon as I got there I called my brother to let him know I had arrived. He doesn't answer, but calls me back in less than a minuet 60 seconds. He tells me he has just hit a royal flush in video poker. It wasn't a huge jackpot, but he won something like $2,000. For winnings over $1,000 they make you sign some tax forms. So while the pit boss is going over the paperwork with my brother, Mysil, who is sitting at the video poker machine directly next to him, hits another royal flush jackpot, another $2,000, before he even finished the tax form to claim the first jackpot. This is even more unlikely when you realize it is video poker. Don't know if it is 1 in a million, but when I was 18 myself and a buddy were walking down the street when an accident occurred down the block from where we were. We were walking with our backs to the location of the accident. Suddenly the one tire from one of the vehicles nailed my buddy in the back and sent him flying. He ended up knocked out from cracking his head on the pavement. He woke up in the hospital hours later with a fractured cheekbone and all sorts of bruising and abrasions. Artirasarothemami. I bought a tie that had a cat and a space helmet on it. When I got back into town I was sitting at the bar telling my friend about it. The girl beside me, absolutely stunningly gorgeous, turns to me and pulls up her sleeve, with a tattoo of a cat and a space helmet that looked identical to my tie. I didn't even have the tie on, just happened to be telling my friend about it and she happened to be right there. Work at the local central office for the fire department. One night my co-worker gets a call about an apartment that is burning. It was his apartment. That's always a little awkward. My dad was a volunteer fireman and a bunch of them were out on a call when they got another call for an address that sounded familiar. It was the captain's house. He was getting teased a bit, but his wife said, "I know the signs of a chimney fire, and I'd rather be embarrassed than have our house burn down. I hope your friend's apartment survived." I went to a wedding in Greece once. She was American and he was part Greek, and so they decided to hold the wedding near his family on the island of Icaria. I arrived by ferry with a friend late at night. We were met at the port by some friends who picked us up and drove us immediately to a club bar perched on a cliff overlooking the Aegean. We drank and danced for hours, and at a certain point I noticed the bride and groom having an argument. I didn't pay much attention, but an hour passed and there was still discord among the wedding party. I asked what was wrong, and one of them told me that the bride was peeved because the groom lost the car keys and we had no way back to the other side of the island where we were staying. I didn't really care. They would show up. But more hours passed and still no keys. I went to the bride and said, "Don't worry, I'm good at finding things. I'll find the keys." I went back into the club and scoured the place, but still, no keys. Then I lost interest. What did I care? I was partying on a Greek island with nowhere else to be. Time of my life. After a while, I saw that the sun was starting to come up. Nothing more amazing than sunrise on a Greek island. I walked some stairs down to the beach to watch the sun come up with a group from the party. Drunk, euphoric, and totally at ease. As I stood on the beach, I looked down as a small wave came lapping up against my feet, and with the wave came rippling up a set of keys. Yep. No freaking way. I was forced off the highway at 70 miles per hour when someone merged into my lane. My car did 2 complete 360s. I rolled backwards into a ditch, and I was fine. My car was fine too, just had to reinflate my tires. I won $30K on a scratch ticket a year after that. 6 years after that, I won on Jeopardy! 5 years after that, I posted a story on Reddit that went viral and I sold it to Warner Brothers. At Dave & Buster's, there's a ball drop game. There's a ball sitting really high up with a tube going straight down to a spinning wheel of ticket values. You hit a red button and that cues the ball to drop. I hit jackpot 4 times back to back, cleaned out the machine of tickets, got the guy to restock tickets, hit jackpot the next 2 times, won an Xbox. I was quite happy. I could time it just right, and I kept on getting 75 tickets. Obviously some didn't make it, but I made like 1,100 tickets with $20. I literally just made this account to tell you guys a story I can't resist. A year ago when my fiance was getting ready to propose, he took the ring out of the box and put it into his pocket. Because is that a box in your pocket? Or are you just happy to see me, right? Dinner didn't go as planned that night and he decided to wait. He puts the same pair of pants on the next day, well aware the ring was still there, up until later that evening when he checks his pocket and the little thing was gone with only a small idea of where it could have fallen out at. Except any of those possibilities weren't exactly small. Fast forward a few days of him finally telling me about it, tearing the house apart to look and narrowing it down to one place it could possibly be. The Costco parking lot. A white gold ring. In the middle of winter. Between snowstorms. Plows every couple of hours. Snow piles the size of a house. In a Costco-sized parking lot. It took 1 week to the date of searching, retracing steps, climbing snow piles with metal detectors and flashlights. But that morning we had 50-degree weather in January, and all of the snow piles had started to melt. A perfectly timed search that day, with a perfectly timed melt that melted the right pile just enough to expose the profile of my ring, and there it was. It got pushed 300 feet in front of a plow, covered in feet of snow, and plucked back out at the perfect time. All it had was a few scratches. We get married in April. I live in rural Wisconsin, so seeing a black bear is about a once every 2 year or so occurrence unless you actively seek them out. Me and a buddy were driving through a small town by some houses and said, "Look, a bear." I turned and looked, and it was a huge black dog fenced in someone's yard. I laughed. Okay, whatever. 10 minutes later, we drive back past the house. My buddy yells, "Look, a bear." I look at the house. The dog is now standing at the fence on its hind legs, sniffing at a small black bear on the other side of the fence, in the same exact spot he jokingly said to look 10 minutes earlier. Just an insane coincidence. I am adopted. My parents got me when I was 10 and adopted me at 11. When I was 15 they had my brother. Later that week my mom was looking through my old things because she thought she recognized the name of the doctor that had delivered me. She had collected all the old things from my past foster homes. Turns out the doctor that delivered me had also just delivered my brother. Fast forward to when I am 21. Mom is 9 months pregnant and calls me on my 21st birthday to inform me I now had a baby sisters. So the same doctor delivered me and my brother, even though I am adopted and 15 years older than him, and I have a baby sister who is now 16 that has the same birthday as me. Yep, you were meant to be in that family. D. I dared my short fat friend to jump on the roof and I assumed he would take that stairs, but he jumped off a tree stump, kicked off the wall, caught himself on a tree branch, pulled himself up, and then jumped a good 6 feet from the branch to the roof. And then looked down and said, "I feel like I popped a lung." Ninja Beats is born. My granddad's story, not mine. My granddad, during his time in service in Germany, was in a coma that lasted a couple of weeks. When he woke, a nurse was the first to greet him. Cut to 30-40 years later. He's in a convenience store back here in the UK and the old lady behind the counter recognizes his eyes. He had the brownest eyes. From when he first woke from his coma, a country and decades apart, my granddad and his nurse met again. Still blows my mind. I caddied for a guy when I was 15 who got a hole in one on a par 3 first hole. Greatest day of his life, and plenty of people to witness it. He tipped me $200 on the spot, tipped me $100 after 8 holes, bought me lunch and everybody in the clubhouse a beer. When I was a freshman in high school, I was in Algebra 2 class on a hot day. Windows were open, lights were off, no AC. We were quietly taking a test. I had finished first. Most of the rest of the class were upperclassmen and I was a bit of a dork loser. There was a fly going up and down the rows of students, and I was just sitting there tracking it with my eyes. When it got to my row, I flung my right hand up and caught it. A cool kid sitting next to me said, "No way, I just caught that." I walked to the window with the upperclassman following behind and opened my hand outside and the fly flew out. Cool guy called me Miyagi and told the class what he witnessed. Just for that class, for the rest of that year, I was no longer a dork. I've never had good reflexes, but I beat the odds that day and it was the first time I felt cool as a child. My mom does this all the time. Guess this is what they teach you while growing up on countryside before the age of internet. At a table of 12 people, one person said, "It's funny, my straw is the only one with stripes on it." Everyone else looked around in confusion at a table full of 12 glasses with 12 striped straws. You see, each straw had 2 thin red stripes on opposite sides from the other. Because there were only 2 stripes, and they were thin and opposite each other, it was possible for the straw to be oriented in such a way that you could not see either stripe if they were directly on the sides. From your perspective, the effect was only valid for about 5 degrees of rotation, so about 10 degrees out of 360 degrees if you consider both orientations, or about 1/36 chance by random placement. Just by sheer coincidence, every straw at the table, except hers, was lined up perfectly so that this one person saw only plain white straws in everyone else's drink. That is a 1/36 chance to the 11th power. Luckily, the entire table was composed of people who figured out pretty quickly what was happening. No one touched the straws and we even took turns sitting in her chair to observe the effect. I have cystic fibrosis, hypermobility, SLE, ARFID, and warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia. I haven't done the math, but I am pretty sure I am the only person in the world with that exact list of health issues. Not mine, but an awesome story nonetheless that should be shared. From a coworker, when her dad was in high school, he had a wonderful girlfriend, and they were truly deeply in love, like made for each other kinda thing. In the middle of their senior year, the girl's dad gets a huge promotion and they have to move clear across the country. They tried to maintain the relationship, but it proved too difficult. Coworker's dad eventually meets another woman. They get hitched. 15 years later, the marriage crumbles. A few more years pass. He's on vacation with some work buddies in Hawaii. He's wandering the beach by himself, like barely anybody else on the beach. Super exclusive resort, and sees this woman staring off into the surf. He's thinking she looks a lot like, yep, the high school sweetheart. She turns around, sees him, puzzled expression, but her eyes light up. Indeed, the same person. A few years later she gave birth to my coworker. A few years later she gave birth to my coworker. That must have felt strange for you to type. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.